Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 6, the Legislative Branch, or Congress. During the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the question was asked, who should control the national government? Under the Articles of Confederation, there was a unicameral legislature, and the seats in the legislature, the number of them, were based on population, but each state had an equal number of votes, meaning essentially the state could have anywhere from 3 to 7 members in the legislature, but each state would only vote one time. So now the question is, should we continue on with that plan, or should we do something different? And we're going to go back to the different plans that were put into place at the Constitutional Convention. The first plan is for a unicameral legislature based on population, and this was called the Virginia Plan, and it was proposed by James Madison and Edmund Randolph, two delegates from the state of Virginia. Now, the states that were smaller, Virginia at this time was considered one of the two largest states in the Union. Today, of course, it's nowhere near. But at that time, it was the largest or second largest state in the Union, and the smaller states refused to accept this. They felt that if the Virginia plan was put into effect, that they would lose any clout that they would have in the national legislature. So they will come up with their own conflicting plan, and this will be called the New Jersey Plan, and it'll be proposed by William Paterson. Now, what Paterson and the smaller state delegations will ask for is for a unicameral legislature, this time based on equal representation, to protect the equality of each state. Now, the larger states rightfully refused to accept this because they saw it as undemocratic. Why should a state like Delaware, which is very small and has a very small population, why should it have the same amount of power as a state with a population as large as Virginia or New York or Pennsylvania? So this is in the process. This is a heated debate, and many people in the Constitutional Convention begin wondering if a compromise could be worked out. Well, what is proposed by Roger Sherman will be called at the time the Connecticut Compromise. Today we call it the Great Compromise of 1787. Now, what Roger Sherman said is, why are we focused on a one-house legislature? Why don't we do both? Why don't we combine the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan, and instead of having a one-house unicameral legislature, let's have a bicameral legislature. Have one house of that legislature be based on population. That house, of course, will be the House of Representatives. And have the other house be based on equal representation. That, of course, being the United States Senate. So the House of Representatives will have members based on how large the population of the state is, and the Senate will be based on equal representation. Currently, to this day, we still have 2 senators per state. And this is what we end up with. We end up with a bicameral legislature that we call today Congress, and it will be separated into 2 houses. The lower house is the United States House of Representatives. As I said in the previous slide, its delegations, each state, will be decided by the size of the state population. Each state is guaranteed 1 member, or an at-large member, in the House of Representatives, and then for every additional member of the population, you get 1 extra member in the House. The United States Senate will be the upper house. The Senate will have 100 members currently. There are 50 states, so each state will get 2 senators. So this is where the equality of the states is protected, and the House of Representatives is where the democratic process will be upheld. Now, what is the House of Representatives? Well, the House of Representatives is designed to represent the ordinary citizen. It is where the true democracy in the United States is actually seen. The representatives are elected by direct election. They are the only people under the original Constitution that were elected by direct election. This has changed, and the Senate is also by direct election. But here in 1787, the only place there is a direct election is for your member of the House of Representatives. All seats in the House of Representatives are 2-year terms, meaning every single national election, the entire House of Representatives, which is 435 members, will be up for re-election. And this is because this is seen as the true representative body of the United States. Therefore, you should have as much say over those representatives as you possibly can. Now, there is no term limit. You can run as many times as you want. I believe the age is 29 years old for a member, or no, I'm sorry, it's 25 for the House. It's 25 for the House. It's 30 for the Senate. You have to be 25 years old in order to run for the House of Representatives, and seats are assigned by the state's population, as I mentioned before. And this is proportional to the population done by the U.S. Census. So every 10 years we have a census. We're doing it right now here in 2020, and by 2022 we will draw new districts or new lines, and each state will then have a new proportion of representatives in the House of Representatives. Some states will gain, some states will lose, and some states will stay the same. This is what we call reapportionment, which is the redistribution after the census. Now, the powers of the United States representatives. Well, first of all, because this is where the true representation of the people lies, all revenue bills must begin in the House. This means not only taxation, but also spending bills. The Senate or the President, they cannot start the process of spending or taxation. Only the House of Representatives does this. So that's why when you hear a president say, I'm going to run and I'm going to lower your taxes, that is a lie. A president cannot lower taxes. The Senate cannot lower taxes. They cannot raise taxes. Only the United States House of Representatives can do that. All other bills are written with the Senate. They can start in the Senate, come to the House. They can start in the House or go to the Senate. As I said before, the only difference to this is revenue bills have to start in the House. But everything else, they can start in one and end up in the other. But they have to agree. So all bills that are written have to be written with the Senate. The United States House of Representatives, in the event that there is an electoral college tie, which has only happened twice since 1789, they will be the ones that choose the President of the United States. And each state delegation would get one vote. So there are 50 states. If the Electoral College is tied, meaning no candidate gets 270 electoral votes, the Electoral College would then send the election to the House of Representatives, where they will vote in the House, and it takes 26 states in order to elect a president by simple majority. And each state votes one vote. The House of Representatives is also the one that votes to impeach government officials, including the president or vice president, for what they call treason, bribery, and or high crimes and misdemeanors. The House indicts the president. In the case of Donald J. Trump, who was just recently impeached, the impeachment process starts out in the House. That is the grand jury. They vote to indict the office holder. The trial will then be in the Senate. The leader of the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives elects a Speaker with an absolute majority every 2 years. On the first day of a new Congress every 2 years, they have an election, and the person with the absolute majority of all ballots cast will become the Speaker of the House. Now, the Speaker of the House is a holdover position. It originally existed under the Articles of Confederation, but it was called the President of the United States in Congress assembled. This position will eventually morph under the Constitution into the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Now, the powers of the Speaker, well, first, they preside over the House. They are the administrative head of the House of Representatives. So they set legislation. They make committee assignments. They censure people, members, when they misbehave. They advise a president of the same party on what can get through the House and what might be defeated in the House of Representatives. So the Speaker of the House, by the way, is the third most powerful person in the United States after the president and the vice president. They are second in line to the presidency. The president of the United States, then the vice president, and then the Speaker of the House. So if the president and the vice president are both incapacitated, it would fall to the Speaker of the House to become the acting president of the United States. The upper chamber of Congress is called the United States Senate. And this is designed, at least symbolically, after the Roman Senate of the ancient Roman Republic. The United States Senate is designed to represent what the founders considered the rich and the well-born, but also to represent the interest of the individual states. Senators, under the original Constitution, were appointed by the state legislatures to a 6-year term, which was renewable. Today, of course, that has been changed, and now we do vote for them by direct election in each state. The seats in the Senate are assigned equally. Each state gets 2 delegates in the United States Senate. And the Senate is considered to be an advisory council. It is where legislation goes to be fine-tuned, but it's also there to advise the president on certain things. When it comes to the advisory function, the advise and consent function, it has to approve or deny legislation passed by the House of Representatives. So if the House passes something and the Senate doesn't approve it, it cannot become law. They have to get together, work together to find common ground. It also gets to approve presidential appointments, whether it's to the president's cabinet or to the judiciary, the Supreme Court. They have the right to advise and consent, and their way of advising and consent is by approving or denying presidential appointments. They also approve negotiated treaties. If the executive branch makes a treaty with a foreign country, in order for it to go into effect, it must be approved by the United States Senate, and it must be approved by what we call supermajority, which is a 2/3 vote. Currently, because we have 100 members of the Senate, an approved treaty must get 67 votes in order for it to become active. During an election that is tied in the Electoral College, it's the Senate that will choose the vice president. The House chooses the president. The Senate chooses the vice president. This has only happened once since 1789. I believe it was in 1840 or it was 1836, I believe. You might check the year, but I think it was 1836. It was Martin Van Buren's vice president, I believe, did not get an electoral college majority, and the Senate actually had to vote to elect him. Same rules as the House. Each state delegation gets 1 vote. Again, in order to become vice president under this scenario, you have to get, currently with 50 states, you have to have 26 states approve you to become vice president. The Senate is also the jury during an impeachment trial. Now, we recently had an impeachment of President Donald Trump. The House indicted him, and it was up to the Senate to conduct the trial. The senators are the jury, and the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, sits as the judge during this trial. And in order to convict and remove a president or a vice president or a cabinet official, you must get a supermajority. Again, in this case, a 2/3 majority of the Senate. So in order to convict and remove someone, you have to have 67 senators vote yes. If it's 66 votes for conviction, even though that's more than 50%, that is not enough to convict and be removed, and the person is acquitted. This has happened all 3 times in American history. President Johnson, President Clinton, and President Trump, even if they got over 50%, said, yes, convict and remove, because it wasn't 67 or 2/3 majority, they were not removed from office. So the Senate is the jury for a person, a federal officer's impeachment. The administrative head of the United States Senate is what we call the President of the Senate. Now, the President of the Senate is also technically, by his own election, the Vice President of the United States. The Vice President is the ex officio President of the Senate. Now, obviously, the Vice President has more important things to do than sit in the Senate chambers day by day. So normally, the President of the Senate will only preside over the Senate during special occasions, like the State of the Union address, when they do a joint meeting of the House and the Senate. They cast votes in the case of a tie. The most recent example is the current Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden. Towards the end of his term as President of the Senate, he actually came down and presided over the Senate one day when they were doing a cancer bill, to pass a bill to create a task force to try to find a cure for cancer. And so they asked him to please come down and preside over it, because it was something that was near and dear to his heart, because his eldest son, Beau Biden, who had been the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, had died of cancer, died of a very rare form of brain cancer. And so what happened is they asked him to come down there because they planned on naming it after him. And so this was a very special occasion. And so the Vice President of the United States did come from his offices and presided over the Senate. As I said, if there is a 50-50 tie in the Senate, it is up to the Vice President to break the tie. That's the only time the Vice President actually can vote in the Senate. Now, as I said, day-to-day operations, the Vice President is not here. He is not working day-to-day on these things. And so they choose a temporary presiding officer. And this is what we call the President Pro Temp of the United States Senate. This is the person who does the day-to-day operations. Now, they are not ahead of the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, if he chooses to, can come in at any time and sit as the presiding officer, and the President Pro Temp cannot do anything about it. This is just a temporary President of the Senate while the Vice President is not there. And for most cases, this is in all times. So this is usually given to the longest serving senator from the majority party. So currently, I believe it's Chuck Grassley. I believe he is the president of the Senate currently, because he's the longest serving member and oldest member of the Senate. If the Republicans lose control of the Senate and Patrick Leahy is re-elected to his Senate seat in Vermont, I'm not sure if he's up for re-election or not. I can't remember. He may not be. So if the Democrats win that seat, or win enough seats, 51 seats in the Senate to take control, then Patrick Leahy would become the president of the Senate pro temp. This slide says he was second in line to the presidency. That was true before the change was made. We've had some congressional and constitutional changes. He is now third in line. So after the President of the United States, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, and the president pro temp. So if the president, vice president, and the speaker are all incapacitated, the president pro temp of the U.S. Senate would then become the president. What essentially they did is, in the 1900s, they flip-flopped them. The president pro temp was second in line, the Speaker of the House was third, and because the House is considered the more democratic body, they flipped them. So the slides I made are based off of the original Constitution. We are talking about the modern Constitution. So a couple of things about the Senate. Let's talk about the Senate, and then we'll talk about how a bill becomes law. Now, first of all, when we talk about elections, I want to go over just a couple of things, and then we'll talk about how bills become laws. First of all, you always have an incumbent congressman. There's always, or senator, there's always a current office holder. And what's weird about Congress is, even though Congress is highly unpopular, most people's individual congressman is not. Since 1950, 90% of House incumbents will win re-election. Now, what's sad is that many times Congress has either low double digits or single digit approval ratings. You may see a 13% approval rating for Congress. Yet 90% of House incumbents, and I believe it's 60% of Senate Republicans, win re-election in competitive races. Now, why is it that especially House incumbents, why are they so strong? Well, first of all, redistricting. Most of the time when it's time to redistrict or reapportion it, you redraw the lines after the census results, and you do so in a way that it benefits one party over another. In Republican-controlled states, they usually draw them to make sure they have more Republican members than Democratic members. And in Democratic states, they do the same. They try to make sure they have more Democratic members than they do Republican members. And in order to, when they do this, and they do this making sure that they are not necessarily being Democratic, but they're being party specific, we call this gerrymandering, where they draw these strange looking districts in order to make sure that their people are reelected. The other thing about incumbency is name recognition. You may not like the candidate that's running, but you know their name. You may not know the challenger's name. There are some exceptions. In the case of Arizona, there is an appointed senator. Her name's Martha McSally. She actually ran in 2018. She lost the election, and the next day there was a Senate seat opened up because of the death of John McCain, and she was appointed to that Senate seat. Well, she's running up against a very strong Democratic challenger by the name of Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly is a former astronaut. His wife is a former Democratic congresswoman by the name of Gabby Giffords. So he has huge name recognition. And by the way, it's no surprise because of this, he's actually consistently beating her in the polls. So normally it's the other way. It's the incumbent having the name recognition and the challenger not. Another thing about Congress people, mainly in the House, is casework. We see the Congress people, both in the House and the Senate, on the floor giving speeches and voting, but what you don't really see is what they do behind the scenes. And a lot of times they solve problems for their constituents. Constituents will write letters, email, call about some problem they're having in their own personal life, and these individuals will solve these problems for them in one way or the other. And in many cases, you may not like their stances on abortion or gun control, but they did something to help you personally, and you remember that and you appreciate that. Another thing about being an incumbent is campaign financing. 60% of the money that is donated to election campaigns during every 2-year election cycle goes to an incumbent. Now let's look at challengers for a minute. Successful challengers who end up beating out an incumbent. We have to ask, what makes them beat out an incumbent? What makes an incumbent member of the House or the Senate vulnerable? Well, the first thing we look at is age. Now, a lot of us want to say, well, you shouldn't age discriminate. Well, let's be real clear. It happens. And the best example I can give you is in 2000. The governor of the state of Delaware was a guy by the name of Tom Carper. And Tom Carper was a very popular governor and former representative. And in 1992, he actually switched jobs with another candidate. We had a governor here in the state of Delaware where I grew up, and his name was Mike Castle. Mike Castle decided he was going to, after 2 terms, retire from the governorship. He was term limited, and he was going to do something else. So Carper decided to run for the governorship, and Castle, the governor, ran for his U.S. House seat. Well, in 2000, the governorship is now becoming open again because Tom Carper has served 8 years. He was elected in 92. This is now 2000. And he was told that the incumbent senator was retiring, a guy by the name of William V. Roth. If you may know his name from the Roth IRA. Well, Tom Carper decides to run for this seat. Well, Bill Roth changes his mind and decides he wants to run. Tom Carper was in his late 40s, early 50s. He was a tall, dark-haired man, fairly good-looking, young, charismatic. And Bill Roth had seen better days. He was in his early to mid-80s. Everyone in Delaware knew him. Everyone in Delaware loved him. My family was a fairly Democratic family, and we loved Bill Roth. But he was in his mid to late, I'd say early to mid 80s. And there was a debate towards the end of the election. And the election was tied. I mean, it was a very close election between Carper and Roth. And Roth actually tripped and fell and really hurt himself. And many people in the state of Delaware felt that he was only running because the party had begged him. The Republican Party, the National Republican Party, had begged him and pleaded with him to run. And so, in many ways, the state actually voted him out overwhelmingly. And one reason that people were given when asked was that they felt that it was time for him to retire at his age and enjoy the rest of his life. And I think that most people that talked to Bill Roth after the election, that was kind of a relief for him that he didn't have to serve another 6 years. He turned it over to a younger man. But age does do this. I can think of another example in the mid-2000s. There was a senator in Pennsylvania by the name of Arlen Specter. Arlen Specter was, again, another one of these guys in his mid to late 80s. He had been a Republican. He changed parties, became a Democrat, and he was primaried in the Democratic primary by a young former admiral by the name of Joe Sestak. And being younger, being a military man, being, just seen as more youthful, the voters in Pennsylvania ended up choosing Sestak over Arlen Specter. Well, it didn't work out for the party because the Republicans actually won that seat in the election, a very close contested election. Pat Toomey ended up becoming the senator over Joe Sestak. So, yes, sometimes age does play a role in people's thinking. By the way, I mean, that happened in 2008. There were many people who were on the fence between who they wanted to vote for, Barack Obama or John McCain. And John McCain at that time was the oldest man to ever run for president of the United States. Now, of course, that's Donald J. Trump, who is the oldest man to serve as president, and Joe Biden's the oldest man to run for president. And a lot of people looked at that and they said they liked John McCain, but they didn't think that John McCain was going to be able to have the energy and vigor to serve a full 8 years in office. And hindsight being 2020, he actually did. He lived into like the second year of the Trump presidency. But during that last year of Obama's administration, he was fairly sick. So sometimes age does have a big thing. Another thing is seniority. You know, seniority is a double-edged sword. You want your member of Congress to be senior so that they can be in leadership positions, so they can help you as a state get more things. They can get you more military bases. They can help you get funding for bridges and roads in your state. But seniority can also be a bad thing. You can be there too long. I just saw that someone, if they run in 2022, it'll be their ninth term in the Senate. Think about that a minute. They will have served 9 6-year terms. That's a long time. I mean, that's 54 years. If that person were to live the entire term, and if I'm wrong, forgive me, that person may have only served, this may be his 8th term, so that would be 48 years. Either way, 48, 54, what's the difference of a couple of years? That's a long time to be around. And so a lot of times voters will see seniority as a bad thing. You've been there too long. Your ideas are stagnant. It's time to find someone new and someone better. Now, sometimes scandals will take out an incumbent member of the House or the Senate, and it doesn't have to be that they resign. Sometimes a scandal will be not bad enough to force the member to resign, but bad enough for them to lose either their primary or for them to lose the general election. Now, the exemption or the exception to this would be, his name is slipping my mind at the moment, but there was a senator, David Vitter from Louisiana. David Vitter was a evangelical Christian. He was a pro-family, anti-abortion Republican. And he was caught in a prostitution sting. I mean, he was caught hiring high-priced escorts for sexual favors. And this is a man who was running around saying that he was, you know, the moral family man. Now, in his case, for whatever reason, he did not pay a penalty at the ballot box. He did the whole, oh, I've sinned, I'm sorry, and the voters forgave him. But in most cases, a scandal that may not be illegal, but that is immoral, will bring the end of a candidate's time in office. Now, I will go back and say I'll give you a Democratic version of this as well. If you look at, say, Edward Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, the younger brother of President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He was also in a scandal in the, I think it was the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. I think it was the 70s, where he had been in a car. There was a car accident and someone died in his car. And in that case, just like Vitter, it wasn't enough in the next election to see him be defeated. So it has gone both ways, but most of the time a scandal will make an incumbent vulnerable to a challenger. Unfavorable redistricting. There are times when you are in a solidly Democratic seat. If you're a Democrat, next thing you know, your Republican state house will redraw the districts. And before you know it, you are now in a Republican-leaning district. So you may end up losing re-election simply because the voters that you're used to voting for you are now voting for someone else. Also, appointed versus elected. Now, I want to be clear, there is no such thing as an appointed member of the House of Representatives. If a seat is vacant, you must have an election. But in the Senate, the governors are allowed to appoint a caretaker senator until the next election. Well, an appointed senator is usually very vulnerable to a challenger, even in safe states. I'll give you an example of this where it may be a problem. Again, in the state of Arizona, I go back to Martha McSally. Martha McSally was running in the 2018 election against a Democrat. She lost that election, and then the Republican governor of Arizona turned around and appointed her to the empty Senate seat that had been John McCain's seat that was being held caretaker-wise by John Kyle. And the thought was they wanted to make sure that someone younger that wanted to run in that seat would be there that could run in 2020. So McSally is appointed. She then has to run. She is required to run in the next election to then fulfill out the remaining term of John McCain, who last won the election. I believe his last election was 2016, I believe. Yes, because I think they have to run again in 2022. So now normally an incumbent senator would be hard to beat. But because she was appointed, that meant that they could go out and find a high-quality challenger. And in this case, it is Mark Kelly. So Mark Kelly probably wouldn't have joined this race if this was John McCain or John Kyle, but the fact that it was, it was Martha McSally who had lost a race and then got a Senate seat by appointment, it meant that it was a much easier challenge for Mark Kelly to do than go up against a powerful incumbent. Same thing in Georgia. There is there's two Senate elections this year in Georgia. One for David Perdue, who is running for his regular reelection, and then one for a woman by the name of Kelly Loeffler. Loeffler is appointed to the seat that Johnny Isakson has had about a year and a half ago resigned due to health reasons. She is now required to run for a full term for that Senate seat. And normally in Georgia, it's a grand slam. If you got an R behind your name, you are likely to win that race. Well, she is running in a state that has what we call rank elections. And because of the fact that she is an appointed senator, not an elected senator, she could end up coming in second or third in the general election, even though she is the incumbent. And all of this I've said, age, seniority, scandal, unfavorable redistricting, and then in the Senate, whether you're appointed or elected, it all gets down to one thing. If you fall into one or more of these categories, and you can fall into more than one, it will mean that higher quality challengers will come out to attempt to unseat you from your seat. So that does cause problems for incumbents. Now, one thing to look at when you're looking at the House and Senate are the demographics. And the question is whether the House and the Senate is actually really representative of the American people. And most would argue that it is not. First of all, 1/2 of the people in the United States consider themselves to be blue-collar workers. These are people who work jobs with their hands. And yet the majority of the members of the House and Senate are upper-class professionals. They're doctors, they're lawyers. 50.8% of the delegates in the House and the Senate are considered millionaires. So these are not your average everyday people. 50% of the population are female here in the United States. And yet in the House of Representatives, we don't see our first member of the House elected until Jeanette Rankin in 1916 from Montana. Since 1917, when she took office, there's only been 325 female members of the House of Representatives. But one thing to note is that the current members of the House of Representatives, there's 102 females serving in Congress right now. That is the high point for Congress. That's 23.2% of the delegates in the House of Representatives. 89 of them are Democrats, 13 are Republican. Same thing for the United States Senate. The first member Female member of the U.S. Senate was Rebecca Felton of Georgia. She was appointed for a day in 1922. Since that time, 57 women have served in the United States Senate, 36 Democrats, 21 Republicans. The current makeup, again, the largest in American history. We have 26 female delegates. That's 26% of the U.S. Senate. 17 of them are Democrats. 9 of them are Republicans. 6 states have all female delegations: Arizona, California, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Washington. African Americans. African Americans make up approximately 18 to 20% of the population. Yet, because of slavery, the first member of the House of Representatives is not until 1879, and that would be Joseph Rainey of South Carolina. Shirley Chisholm will be the first modern female African-American woman to be appointed or to be elected to the House of Representatives. Since Rainey in 1879, 153 African-Americans have served in the House. Currently, we have 56 African-American members. In the Senate, the first member of the U.S. Senate is a Republican by the name of Hiram Revels from Mississippi. He was elected in 1870. The first African-American woman to serve in the Senate is Carol Moseley Braun, who was elected in 1992. Now, the history of African Americans in the Senate is quite sparse. Hiram Rhodes served from 1870 to 1871, and then there'll be a couple of years before Blanche Bruce, another Mississippi Republican, is elected in 1874, and he'll serve from 1875 to 1881. And then from 1881 until 1867, you do not see another African American member of the Senate. Now, that member of the Senate that is elected in 1966 is Edward Brooke from Massachusetts. And he'll serve 6 terms in the United States Senate, finally leaving in January of 1979. From 1979 until 1993, you do not have any African Americans serving in the Senate. That is until Carol Moseley Braun is elected in 1992. She serves 1 term in the Senate from 1993 to 99. And then from 1999 until 2005, we do not see another African American. That is until a little-known state senator by the name of Barack Obama wins election in 2004. He'll serve from 2005 until 2008. When in November of 2008, he resigns in the middle of his term in order to, of course, take up the office of President of the United States. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In 2009, Roland Burris is appointed to succeed Barack Obama to his Senate seat, and he'll serve from 2009 to 2010. He becomes the first African American to succeed another African American in the Senate. We do have a senator appointed from the state of South Carolina, Republican Tim Scott. He is an incumbent. He is currently there. He's one of the 3 African Americans that currently serves in the Senate. We do have, along with him, 2 Democrats, Cory Booker, who was elected and took office in 1913. He won 2013, sorry. He won a special election to replace the deceased Senator Frank Lautenberg. And then Kamala Harris, the current vice presidential nominee, was elected to the Senate in 2016 from the state of California. So we do have currently 3 African Americans serving in Congress, in the Senate. We do have 2 African Americans serving, 2 Native Americans, serving in the House of Representatives, both Democrats, Sharice Davis and Deb Haaland. We have had members, we have had Native American members in the Senate. The most recent one is Charles Curtis, who became vice president for President wait a minute. It was his name has slipped my mind. Not Coolidge. Hate it when it slips your mind in the middle of this. Not Harding, not Coolidge, but Herbert Hoover. It was Herbert Hoover's vice president. So we have been getting better on the demographics. We have been more like modern America, but we have a lot of work to do. Now, how does a bill become law? Well, this is the academic version of how a bill becomes law. I'm going to post the Schoolhouse Rock video so that you can get the more easy answer to this. But essentially what happens is when they decide to come up with a law, we'll start in the House. A member will drop a bill into a box that they call a hopper. And then that bill is moved onto the agenda by the party leader, the committee chair, and it's given a bill number. And in the House, it's an HR number. In the Senate, it's basically the same thing, except there's no hopper to put it in. A senator is recognized to speak on the floor. He proposes the bill, he announces it on the floor, and then if it's approved by the party leaders and the committee chair, the bill will be given a number. In the Senate, it's given an S number. It is then assigned in both chambers, it's assigned to a committee. In the House, it goes to the Rules Committee and then all the other committees, and then it will go to the full House for a vote. In the Senate, it will go to the different committees. It'll go to the final standing committee, and then it will go to the Senate for a full vote. Now, if the bills are different, they will then have to go to conference committee. This is a meeting of members of the House and the Senate together, and their job is to reconcile these two bills into one bill that can pass both the House and the Senate. And then they have to vote on those bills and pass them. Now, if the bills are the same, they send them to the president's desk. And if the president signs them, or if he refuses to sign them, and there's 10 days or more left in the legislative session, these become law. If the president vetoes or leaves them unsigned with less than 10 days, they do not become law. Now, the only exemption to this is that if the president vetoes it and 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate vote to override his veto, then the bill becomes law over his veto. Now, in the Senate, there are two rules that they don't have in the House, and this decides when to end debate and actually go for a vote. In order to end debate, you have to enact what's called cloture, and this is what prevents people from stalling on legislation. In order to enact cloture, you must have 60 votes. And this is, they always say you have to have 60 votes to pass something in the Senate. Well, no, you don't. You have to have 60 votes to end debate to then go on to actually do the voting. You only need 50% plus 1 in order to pass something, but you have to have 60 to end debate. Now, if someone does not want something to go to the floor for a full vote, and the people who are trying to get it passed do not have 60 votes, you can do something called a filibuster, which is designed to delay legislation by not allowing debate to end for that final vote to be done. But these are two things that are specific of the U.S. Senate. These do not exist in the House of Representatives. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. If not, have a great week, and we'll see you next week.